Hey guys, welcome back. So in this video, we're going to be looking at this piece right here, and this is a very beautiful walnut piece, or I should say it's a potentially beautiful walnut piece. This is actually a commission piece that I'm working on. And you can see there is quite a bit of damage on this piece. There's 1,000 scratches along with some ring marks, and the finish is very alligatored in some spots. And I'll talk more about what that is later on, but basically it just looks like alligator scales. The finish just kind of cracks. And it does look kind of pretty cool actually, but it is finish damage, so it's definitely got to go. But anyway, moving on. This piece is made by Drexel. And Drexel was founded in Drexel, North Carolina in 1903, I believe, by Samuel Huffman. And they make pretty good furniture. You can see all the drawers have a beautiful mahogany veneer on the bottoms, as well as having dovetail construction, which is always a plus. And the drawer boxes themselves are actually made of oak. And oak is used a lot of the time in drawer boxes because oak is very resistant to moisture and is overall just a very durable, strong wood. Now this drawer has a felt liner in it that I'm most likely going to have to be replacing just because I think it's just a little bit too far gone to salvage. And behind these two doors down here, we have a couple of shelves that I'm going to be refinishing as well. So I'm going to be refinishing this piece inside and out. So let's get into it. And I'm going to start here by removing all of the hardware. And one thing I found when I was removing the hardware was underneath the hardware, the finish has basically been untouched since this piece was built, and it looks very different from what the rest of the piece looks like. You can see in this shot right here, it's pristine. I mean, this is what the finish would have originally looked like. And because walnut is a fader, meaning it fades over time, the rest of the piece now looks a lot different. And this is mainly due to UV light exposure from sunlight, which kind of degrades the wood's natural pigments, and also oxidation. So basically, if you had a walnut dresser that was half in sunlight and half out and left there over time, you would see a significant change in color. So now this hardware, my customer is requesting that this hardware have an antique finish. So I think what I'm going to be doing is I'm just going to use some Brasso and just kind of clean them up a little bit, but I'm going to leave a lot of the patina on these to make them look a little bit aged. Now I'm just using MCS cleaner degreaser just to give this piece a very good clean down. I'm going to be scraping down the top, but I'm going to be using a chemical stripper on the rest of the piece. And I'll explain why in a second. But I like to clean my pieces from top to bottom and inside and out, just to get rid of any dirt, dust, debris, oils from your skin, or whatever it could be on a piece after decades of use. And here I'm just going to be doing a little test scrape. I like to just do a little test scrape just to see how well the finish comes off. And this finish was more on the thick side, so it's definitely going to take a little bit of muscle, but it's doable. Now I just wanted to acknowledge something. I've actually been referring to this as a carbide scraper in my previous videos. It's not a carbide scraper. This is actually a metal paint scraper. I've just been referring to it as a carbide scraper by habit. I do have a carbide scraper though, which I actually just got. And I'm probably going to be using that in my next video. Now, to anybody who's new at scraping and is a little bit intimidated by it, which I absolutely was in the beginning, all you want to do is just maintain even pressure and just pull one continuous stroke. And what I mean by even pressure is you basically want to have it level with the surface that you're scraping. You don't want to dig in on one side. And here I'm just slowing down this one part just because I'm coming in on a 45-degree angle to get the remainder off the edge. And when you're doing this, you want to be very delicate because it's extremely easy to gouge the corners and edges. It's also good to come in on a 45-degree angle just to get the last bit off the edge, because you never know if the edge banding is actually higher or lower than the top. Sometimes the edge banding is actually flush with the top, and if you pull one big long stroke and pull it off the edge, you could rip the edge banding right off. And speaking of edge banding, actually, I was actually surprised to find that there is no edge banding on this piece. It's just the substrate that's kind of sticking out. So that's just one weird thing that I found that I was kind of surprised by. So I'm going to be sanding down the top first before I do any of the rest of this piece, because I'm going to be applying some oxalic acid, and it's very important to give whatever surface you're going to be applying the oxalic acid to a light sanding before it's applied. And this is just because you want to make sure that the oxalic acid really gets into those wood fibers and penetrates. Stripping the piece isn't enough. You really have to give it a nice light sanding before you apply the oxalic acid. And I'm just using a 180 grit since I got pretty much all the finish off with via scraping, so I really don't need to go in with anything any harsher than that. All right, so I'm just going to mix up my oxalic acid, and it usually comes in like a powdered crystal kind of a form, and I just mix it into some hot water. And depending on who you ask, I'm sure the answers will vary, but I usually mix in enough to where the oxalic acid basically stops absorbing into the water. That usually tends to work for me. And you want to remember to not just put the oxalic acid on the stain itself, you want to cover the entire surface that the stain is on. If you just put it on the stain itself, you run the risk of getting uneven coloring, basically a bleach spot. So it's very important to cover the whole surface. Now the finish that was on the top was kind of failing and flaky, and it scraped off pretty well, but the finish that's on the rest of the piece is pretty well adhered. So I'm going to be using a chemical stripper to remove it. I use Clean Strip Premium Stripper. I just find that this stripper works the best out of the ones that I've tried. And I'm just applying it with a chip brush. Now I'm wearing a respirator, I'm wearing gloves, and I should even be wearing safety goggles that I usually do wear. This stuff is extremely toxic, like really, really toxic. And it just absolutely stinks. So you just want to make sure that you're really protecting yourself against this stuff. Now for all the flat surfaces, I'm just using my putty knife to get the finish off. But for all of the trim work, which is kind of, curved and a little decorative, I'm going to be using a nylon bristle brush. This finish is extremely gummy when the stripper is applied, so I'm just loosening up the finish with the nylon bristle brush and making it a lot easier to take off. And after I've removed the finish either with the putty knife or disturbed it with the nylon bristle brush, I'm going to come in with some acetone and just clean up all the residue. And I use acetone to clean up all the residue just because acetone kind of cuts and melts into the rest of the whatever finish is left over and basically just dissolves it. It doesn't do this with every finish, but most finishes that I've tried, it does work. Now, I mentioned in the beginning that there were a lot of parts of this piece that were alligatored, and this drawer right here is a great example. It's so alligatored. It almost looks like an old leather suitcase. This is also called crazing, and there's a couple reasons why this could happen. Number one, it could just be from natural aging. Two, it could be exposure to UV light. Extreme temperatures can do it, and also improper application of the coating. And I'm just taping up the hardware holes underneath just so I don't get any stripper going down there. And I'm going to apply the stripper to the drawers. Now, when you're using paint stripper, you want to make sure that you're putting on a nice thick layer. You want to kind of really glob it on there because it tends to kind of dry out a little bit if you put a very, very thin layer. And if that's the case, you're going to have to put multiple layers. So it just makes it a lot easier just to put one thick layer on. You can also use garbage bags. I've seen people cover up what they're stripping so that the stripper doesn't dry out. I don't really have a need to do that just because this stripper is very strong and it usually cuts through with one thick layer. But if you're having trouble with your stripper drying out, you could try covering it with a garbage bag and see if that helps. And just like the carcass, after I'm finished removing the stripper, I'm just coming in with a soaking wet shop towel with acetone and just wiping up the rest of that finish. And all right, here is where I got into a little bit of a situation. Basically what happened was I applied the stripper to both drawers and everything was going smoothly. The first drawer basically came right off just as usual. And I started doing the second drawer that had the alligatoring. And for some reason, I don't know why, but it just was not coming off with the stripper. I put 2 applications of stripper and I tried to scrape it off, but there was barely anything coming off. So I scraped off what I could and let it dry, and I just came in with a scraper and just scraped the finish off. I'm not really sure why the alligatored portions of this piece just wouldn't come off with the stripper, but I don't know, it's very strange. Alright, so after waiting for the oxalic acid to completely dry, I'm coming in with a soaking wet shop towel with water, and I'm just rinsing it off. One very important step that wasn't shown was the application of a mixture of water and baking soda to neutralize the oxalic acid. When the baking soda mixture is applied, it actually will kind of fizz up and foam, which indicates the oxalic acid getting neutralized. After that step, then you want to come in with a wet shop towel with water and just rinse it a couple times. And as I'm letting that dry, I'm going to work on stripping the rest of the piece. This right here was another section that was very alligatored, so I just tried to get as much as I could off with the stripper and scraped up as much as I could, and surprisingly a decent amount of it did come off. There was still a bunch of finish that was being very stubborn, but I did get a good majority of it off. Especially using this nylon bristle brush, it really helped to kind of loosen up the finish to the point where I can more easily scrape it off. But I think I'm just going to come in with some sandpaper and just very carefully sand off the rest. And not even acetone would eat through this finish, the alligatored finish. I don't know what it is about the alligatored finish that makes it so impenetrable, but I don't know, it really surprised me. All the other areas, I really had no trouble at all with the stripper and the acetone. It was just that alligatored finish. And here you're going to notice that half the door basically is alligatored. So again, I'm just going to get off whatever I can, and the rest I'm just going to do with sanding. Now, the back of these doors are actually mahogany, and that was pretty typical of mid-century furniture to have an outside layer of, let's say, walnut or teak, and the inside layer to be mahogany. It was just a very common pairing of veneers. All right, so finally I have basically the entire piece stripped off. So I'm going to come in with a 180 grit sandpaper and just start sanding. Now my customer wants a satin finish and she doesn't want a film forming finish. So I'm using Odie's oil. And with Odie's oil, the sheen is controlled by how high you sand. So I'm going to be sanding up to 400 grit just to get a nice satin sheen. And I'm going up to 400 grit on everything. So the sides, the top, the drawer faces, everything's going to be up to 400 grit. Everything except the trim, actually. The trim, I'm only going up to 180 because when I stain the trim, I want it to be a little bit more on the darker side. So going up to 180 should be perfect. Now for the curved areas, the curved drawers, the curved base, I'm using this foam interface pad from Surf Prep. And what this is going to do is it's going to make it a lot easier to kind of hug the curve and give me a nice even sanding on those curved sections. And for anybody who's wondering how to climb up through the grits, I'm starting at a 180 grit, going up to 220, then 320, and 400. And it looks like I'm sanding against the grain in this shot, but I'm actually not. It's just the figure of the wood that makes it look like the grain is running vertical, but it's actually running horizontal. And here is where I'm going to be sanding off the rest of that finish that was alligatored that I couldn't get off with a stripper. And you have to be very, very careful when you're sanding through a finish when you're working with veneer because it's so easy to go through that veneer. If you're not really a person who's experienced in sanding, I wouldn't recommend trying to sand through a finish. If you're working with solid wood, it's okay. But if you're working with veneer, if you're not too experienced with a sander, I wouldn't recommend it. Especially on this edge right over here, you have to hold the sander completely level with the surface, otherwise you'll go right through the veneer on the edge. I was, to be honest, a little nervous doing this, but I was kind of confident in my abilities, so I was able to do it without blowing through the veneer. And I decided to hand sand when it came time to sand next to this trim on the door, just because you can really get close into the corners with hand sanding and get the rest of that finish off that you weren't able to get with the power sander. Now I am sanding against the grain just to get this finish off, but I will come back in and sand with the grain as I climb up through the grits. And this was also that area that was still alligatored and had a bunch of finish left over that I'm going to be getting off with hand sanding. And sorry for my hand being in focus right here. For some reason, my phone decided that my hand was more important than what I was doing. And one thing I really like to do is to give the inside of the carcass a really good sanding. I like to get in all those unseen areas and just give basically the entire piece a refresh. This isn't something you really have to do, but it's something that definitely will take your work up a notch in detail. And I'm just removing the shelves just to get better access to the inside of this little cubby area. And I really tried to position my camera in the best angle that I could to film this. So if the shots are a little bit blurry or a little bit kind of on a weird angle, I apologize. It's just trying to shoot this the best I can. But it's got a little hard sometimes with these really tight spaces. I also sanded every single drawer box inside and out. This is also something that you really don't have to do, but it's something that I really like to do to make this piece really stand out. Now on one of the drawers, there was a little piece of veneer that was lifting up. So I just took a little bit of glue. I could have used a glue syringe, but it was only one little piece of veneer and I didn't want to fill up a glue syringe if I didn't have to. So all I did was I just kind of forced some glue in there with my finger and taped it up and clamped it off camera. And it's always great to see a little bit of a glue squeeze out after you glue up a joint or glue up some veneer, because that just really tells you that you have enough glue in there. Now this drawer right here had what I thought was a really dark stain, really dark stain. And I sanded it to see if I could maybe lighten it a little bit, but eventually realized that this was not a stain. This was actually a really bad burn mark. So all I did was I sanded down the rest of the drawer box, and when I was finished with that, I came back in and I think I used a 220 grit, and I just sanded out that burn mark. And I just added some wood filler, and I'm going to do some color correction on it later. This little spot right here actually was a stain though, so I was able to sand that out. These are those two shelves that I removed before, and I'm just going to be sanding those front and back. And there were a couple spots on the base that needed some wood filler, because there was some cracking and some chips of the veneer, so I just filled those up. And one little tip when using wood filler, you want to kind of make it a little bit proud, so when you come in with your sander later, you can sand it down flush. Now I'm just climbing up through my grits, and I'm using the pencil trick in between each grit, so I know I get a nice even sanding and helps me to not go through the veneer. For anybody who's unfamiliar with what this pencil trick is, all you do is you make some light marks on the wood so that you know exactly where you haven't sanded, And as soon as you sand over those lines and they disappear, you know that you've sanded just enough. This trick is really great for using on veneer because it will almost guarantee that you don't go through the veneer if you do it correctly. So I just wanted to take a moment and just say thank you to everybody who commented on my last video, who liked my last video. It's up to like 54,000 views or something crazy like that. The response that I've gotten has completely blown me away, and it really motivates me to keep making these videos. And yeah, it's just a really great feeling. So I just wanted to say thank you so much to everybody who contributed in some way to that last video. I absolutely love making these videos, and I love the fact that I can share this with all of you guys. All of your comments have been so sweet and so amazing, and it really has touched me. So I just wanted to say a big thank you. Okay, so we're almost at the staining portion of this video. All I'm doing now is I'm just taking some OD Safer solvent and I'm basically just cleaning the top. But what this also is doing is showing me what this wood is going to look like with a clear coat over it, so I can match the stain to match the veneer. I hope that made sense. Alright, so now I'm going to whip up my stain, and for this I'm using some OD Safer solvent, which is what I'm using right here. And I'm just going to start adding my pigments in, mixing a couple different colors. I'm not sure, I forgot exactly what colors I mixed, but there was like 5 colors, I think. And I was trying to get a slightly reddish brown, like kind of like a walnut color. And once I found my base color, I just poured in some OD Super Duper Everlasting oil, gave it a really good mix. And the color that I had didn't exactly match as much as I wanted it to, so I'm adding a couple different colors to try to get the exact color I'm looking for. And after mixing a couple different pigments in, I think I finally found the right color. So I'm going to give that a really good mix and put that aside for when I start to stain. So now that that's out of the way, I'm going to cut up a Merkur Milan pad into 4 equal sections, and I'm going to use this to apply the stain. I'm staining in sections so that the stain doesn't dry out on me, which can sometimes happen. And I'm just wiping it on and letting it sit for about 2 minutes and then wiping it off.
just using a nail set here just to punch down these nails a little bit lower than the level of the wood. And then I'm going to use some wood filler and fill those up. And it's time for my finish. Odie's oil is probably one of my favorite finishes to use, especially on raw wood. It's a tung oil based hard wax oil finish. And in my opinion, I think that it brings out just the natural beauty and luster in the wood. It's really one of my favorite finishes. One great thing about Odie's too is that you really don't need much. It really takes a very minuscule amount to do a piece like this. All I'm doing is I'm in circular motions, I'm rubbing the Odie's oil down into the wood grain, and I'm using a 1500 grit Merkur Milan pad, just like I'd use for the stain. And for all the trim work, I'm going to be using Odie's Super Duper Everlasting Oil, which is basically very similar to the Odie's Universal Oil, except it's a little bit thinner in consistency. Now this is going to bring out the luster in the stained wood and really make that wood shine. I'm just sanding off that wood filler that I applied to the little nail holes. And then I'm going to apply the Super Duper Everlasting Oil to the mahogany bottoms, as well as to the entirety of the shelving area. And after I've let all that Odie sit on there for about an hour and a half, I'm going to come in and buff all of the oil off. This is a really, really important step when using Odie's, because if you don't buff all of the oil off, and I mean all of the oil, you won't have a successful finish. A really great trick is if you drag a couple fingers across the surface and you see little trails or like streak mark, you want to keep buffing. You got to keep buffing until you could drag your fingers across and there are no trails. I usually start with a cotton terry towel and get the bulk of it off, and then I'll come in with a couple shop towels and just buff the rest off. All right, we're almost done here. A couple more steps to go. I'm just sanding down this wood filler in the drawer, and I'm going to be sealing all of the drawers with a nice layer of shellac. And here you could see the beautiful mahogany bottoms that these drawers have just completely come to life when I put the shellac on. So I finally decided to change the back panel that this piece had. So I got a piece of hardboard from Home Depot and just ripped it down to size. Here I'm just doing some color correction with some blend-all sticks from Mohawk. And I'm going to blend a couple different colors together to get hopefully a very, very close match to what this veneer looks like. And once I'm happy with the color match, I'm just going to seal it in with some Mohawk lacquer. This one was a little bit tricky because this was sliced right against the grain, and no matter what I did with this, you're going to be able to see it. But my goal is to try to camouflage it as much as I can, so I'm just doing the best with what I have to work with. Now I just used some Mohawk blend-all sticks, and I'm using Mohawk graining markers to just kind of fake some grain lines to try to make it more convincing. But this was a hard one. This one's pretty hard to camouflage, but I'm doing my best. And last but not least, I'm just going to give this hardware a nice brasso bath. You can see I'm just squirting on the brasso, and I'm going to just rub it onto every square inch of this hardware that I can. And I'm going to let the brasso do its magic and let it sit for about 10 minutes. And like I said in the beginning, my customer is requesting that this hardware have kind of like an antique looking finish. So my goal here is to basically get a good amount of the tarnish off, but I want to leave a little bit on. So I'm just lightly scrubbing them with the nylon bristle brush, and I'm going to hopefully get that look. And after scrubbing all the hardware, I'm just going to rinse it under some hot water. And I'm actually very happy with how these came out. It's the perfect amount of tarnish, I think, and it has that nice antique kind of look. So I'm just going to dry them off, and I'm going to start putting this piece back together. So one thing I actually did not show was me creating a new piece of felt liner for the drawer. But it was pretty simple. I just went to Michael's, got some new felt. I got a little bit of a backing for it, and I traced out the old one onto the new piece of felt. I used a fabric adhesive to glue it together, and that was it, and it fits perfectly. So I'll show you guys that in the reveal. So I just want to say thank you guys so much for watching yet another video. I'm sorry it took me so long to finally get this video out, but this was a commission piece, so I wanted to make sure I took my time and really made this a special piece for the customer. I'm already working on my next video, so that should hopefully be coming out in about a week's time, but I don't want to jinx myself. So without any further ado, let's just take a quick look at what this piece used to look like. It was pretty dull looking. It was very worn and had like 1,000 scratches on it. There were a couple stains and a big ring mark. The finish was all alligatored. So this piece was in dire need of a good makeover, and I really hope I did this piece justice. If you like this kind of content, consider liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting. I'm a new channel, so it's all very much appreciated. But alright, without any further ado, let's check out the reveal. I'll see you guys next time.